Just so you know, on November 8th, we will be having a working group meeting where we'll be talking about everything related to Bay SAMP and update you on all the meetings that we've been having. Many of them are listed on our Bay SAMP website, and many of the recordings are there and summary notes are there. But again, the purpose of today's meeting is to talk about issues related and opportunities related to fishing and the Bay SAMP and the aquaculture element. We're really trying hard to make this be as if we're all in the same room and as informal as we can make it and as organized as we can make it. So if you have any questions or have a comment, you can either raise your virtual hand or you can put your question in the chat room, or you can just put a Q, all right, in the chat room, and I will call on you just like that. I will call on you and set the queue up. So again, the idea is that we have good interaction. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jeff Willis, the CRMC Executive Director, who will give you a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Jen. And Jen had mentioned quite a bit of the information that we want to talk about already. And I know many have to leave at 5, so I'll be very brief. This aquaculture element of the Narragansett Bay SAMP effort, if you will, is looking at how aquaculture as an industry is looking to cite a number of projects in Narragansett Bay. The very brief background is that aquaculture, while it has been around pretty much forever, from an agency perspective, it's grown very quickly from the coastal ponds into Narragansett Bay. And the coastal ponds have pretty much, well, they haven't reached their limit, quote unquote, but aquaculturists are finding that they need some more elbow room. They're finding other ways to find nutrients for their product and to grow them to reach market size. And they're looking at areas in Narragansett Bay to do that. As you all know, there's a lot of different activities occurring in Narragansett Bay where we are complementing and competing for the same space for all these different uses. So what this particular task is trying to do is look at the growth of aquaculture and the existing uses, both natural and physical, that exist in Narragansett Bay, and find ways to make them complementary. And if there are areas where they can't coexist, we're looking for those types of issues too. So we're reaching out to a number of stakeholders. And as Jennifer mentioned, we're specifically asking the fishing community to discuss these issues so that we get a better understanding from that community as to what some of the complementary and conflicting issues could be with aquaculture as we move forward with the issue. So I'll leave it there. I'm going to turn it over to Ben Getz, our aquaculture coordinator, to talk more specifically about the project. But I just want to appreciate everybody's time that they're taking. I know I've heard that there are several meetings going on right now, and of course there's ones bumping up against ours. So thank you for taking the time to participate in this. It's important that we get as many ears, eyes, and perspectives on this matter so that we can come to some sort of conclusion in moving the issue forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually, we're just going to, Jeff, I know we were going back and forth on this. We, in talking with Bob Rowe, we're going to do him first, and we're going to listen to his presentation and then go right to Ben, if that's okay with you. Okay. So many of you know Bob Rowe. And Bob is going to give a very quick summary of a presentation called Fishing and Shellfish Aquaculture, and he's got some really great videos to share. So Bob, you're on.
So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep, we're good. We can see it.
And I'm just going to speak for a few minutes. And so I've been farming. Well, I sold my farm about 13 years ago, but for 25 years, I was growing oysters in Point Judith Pond. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about some of the ecosystem services that shellfish aquaculture provide to the fish community, the fish habitat, the fish themselves, really. So everyone knows that shellfish remove nitrogen from the environment. Every time we pack up a box of oysters, we're shipping a few pounds of nitrogen off to Manhattan. And that helps mitigate some of the eutrophication symptoms in the bay. We also know that the gear that we use and the shellfish themselves provide habitat, complexity and vertical structure, provides food and refuge. Any good fisherman knows that that's where you go fishing. And it stimulates the abundance and biodiversity similar to natural and artificial reefs. Also, the animals are reducing the turbidity and improving the water quality. So in Point Judith Pond, we had a 2.3 acre lease. And you can see the buoys behind me, behind my employee Graham there. And each one of those buoys had 10 cages. So we had 550 of these 6-foot cages on the bottom. What I didn't know at the time was that we were going to create some of the best habitat in the state, some of the best diving, the most amazing assemblage of critters. Every single cage had a couple of juvenile lobsters hanging out in it, all sorts of baby tautog and cunner, critters, crabs, everything else is hanging out there. And consequently, it attracted a bunch of larger fish. So, we all went to work with fishing poles. And whenever I wanted to take my kids fishing, I took them to the lease because I'm not a very good fisherman, but I knew we would catch fish. So, the survival and growth of fish and crabs is improved whenever you have vertical structure as opposed to barren bottom. So we actually got a graduate student to come and look at that. And you see here some baby tautags and cunners that were coming up on the cages. We would typically flip these back into the water. And Joe D'Alteris, one of his students, Brian Kilpatrick, surveyed our gear and compared it to nearby submerged aquatic vegetation or eelgrass bed and to nearby unvegetated bottom or just blank mud that was just outside the lease. And the conclusion you see there on the bottom is that shellfish aquaculture gear has substantially greater habitat value than the non-vegetated seabed, and the habitat value at least equal to or possibly superior to that of a submerged aquatic vegetation, which of course is protected under federal law as essential fish habitat. So this is some of the data that he collected, and you can't see what's on the right, or at least I can't, but that's the list of names of all of the different types of fish that were sampled. The 3 bars, the green bars represent the eelgrass. The blue bars, which you don't see much of, are the non-vegetated bottom, and the bright pink bars are the numbers of fish that were caught in the aquaculture cage traps. So we put a big net around each of the cages and lifted the whole cage up on deck and counted everything inside. And these are logarithmic plots. So this is 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, 10,000, 100,000. So, there were 100,000 of these. Oh God, I can't even see what that is.
What number do you want?
Number 9.
Cunner.
Cunner, thank you. Yes, the Cunners love these gear. But you can see that in many cases, especially we're more in summer than in the other seasons, but in many cases, there were 10 to 10,000 times as many fish being captured in our gear as in the nearby eelgrass bed. And the same was true when we were looking at crabs and other types of critters that were hanging out. And of course, everybody loves to eat crabs and shrimp and worms. So it was one big happy family. What I quickly found out when I talked to some ecologists is that just because you're aggregating fish doesn't necessarily mean you're improving productivity. To actually show benefits to productivity, you need to be able to show improved growth, survival, and reproduction. Of course, the detritivores, the worms and amphipods that are eating the oyster poo, they are providing the forage fish for the base of the food chain. But we needed to do a different study. So Jessica Tallman did her master's thesis over at Rome Point, and she compared the abundance and survival and growth rates of tautog and scup and black sea bass on these oyster cages, as well as compared them to artificial reef, a constructed reef, and some rocky natural reefs. And what she discovered was that using a mark and recapture study with thousands of fish, that the oyster cages actually provide a good quality habitat for fish that are associated with this rocky bottom. So that was very reassuring that we weren't just a fish attracting device, we were actually providing great habitat as well. So that was good. Now I got a couple quick videos here. Hopefully this plays for you. This is
Yep, we see it.
This is some really nice work done by NOAA. They have mounted some GoPro cameras on some oyster cages just to see what's going on. You can see an amazing assemblage. They've got videos that you can see. You can visit their website online, see tautog spawning on these cages. I've never seen a tautog spawn before. I wish we had visibility this nice in Point Judith Pond, because I could show you some of that video. But this is another video that was shot by one of my members. He made me vow not to tell where it is, because he doesn't want a bunch of fishermen coming and getting all tangled up in his gear. I mean, certainly we welcome fishermen on our leases as long as they don't come and help us harvest our oysters. But be aware that there's a lot of gear and lines in the water, so you want to make sure that you're not too close, because you're going to lose some of your tackle. And just the sheer abundance of these beautiful stripers makes me want to go fishing, I'll tell you. They're hanging out under these oyster grow cages, and it's a wonderful thing. So at this point, I didn't want to take too much of your time, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you. Thanks, Skid. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, your virtual hand, or put it in the chat room. We do have lots of time for discussion, and Skid, you're going to be here for the entire meeting. Is that right?
I hope to be, yeah.
Okay. So with that, I'm sure there's going to be questions. I love those videos. That was great. Let's go to Ben. And Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about the CRMC's aquaculture and permitting process?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess just for everyone's benefit who may have not seen this part of the presentation, I'm going to go over our permit review process, try to highlight the areas where fishing activity is considered. I guess just building off what Bob said, CRMC recognizes that shellfish aquaculture is sustainable and has a net positive ecosystem impact. However, one of the things that CRMC is charged with doing with the aquaculture program is balancing the uses. So our permit process attempts to do that. And I will share this diagram and just kind of walk you through it. Okay, so you can see every application begins with what we call a preliminary determination. This is a separate kind of draft application. It is a meeting, essentially, is the main event of the preliminary determination, and we hold that meeting in the town closest to the application. We try to get as much early input on an application as we can at this level. So that includes town, often the Harbor Commission, or whoever else may be tasked by the town to hear this review. The Coast Guard, DEM, of course, always there. Sometimes Army Corps of Engineers, as most aquaculture does require their authorization as well. And then, non-governmental agencies in fishing industry. So, we try to involve folks like the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers Association. Certainly, I coordinate with the Shellfish Advisory Panel chair of the Rhode Island Marine Fisheries Council. Try to get feedback to that group, from that group if possible at this level as well. All are invited to attend one of these meetings. We do advertise them now on our listserv. If you can't come to a meeting, please send comments or questions ahead of time. I try to do my best to answer those however I can. So after this preliminary determination meeting, there is a staff report to the applicant, kind of documenting concerns, comments raised at the meeting, with recommendations for what to consider perhaps in a full application. These are recommendations only to the applicant. It is their prerogative to follow through on them. It does put a applicant on notice that these may be issues that will surface again during a full application. So after that report has been received by the applicant, they can proceed to the full application. The full application, when submitted to CRMC, is reviewed for completeness. Once it's deemed complete, it is sent out to a 30-day public notice that is done on our website, also through our listserv, and additionally to to the town as well. And also during this time, we have DEM we are statutorily required to consider the opinion of the director of DEM. Usually this comes from the Fish and Wildlife folks or the Marine Fisheries Division. Army Corps of Engineers, as I mentioned, is required to authorize these projects. Historical Conservation and Preservation Commission, required for all applications, not just aquaculture. And then most importantly for this group, perhaps, is the Shellfish Advisory Panel and the Rhode Island Marine Fisheries Council. The advisory panel is just a subcommittee of the Marine Fisheries Council, but we are statutorily obligated to consider the opinion of the Marine Fisheries Council. They usually defer that review to their Shellfish Advisory Panel. However, if the applicant or a member of the public or a panel member, anyone really can appeal that decision to the full Marine Fishery Council for a final recommendation to CRMC. This, I should mention that while this Marine Fisheries Council box is on the same level as the 30-day public notice, it happens after the close of the 30-day public notice, and that is based upon the policy that is outlined between CRMC and the Marine Fisheries Council. So once we have completed all these steps in the review process, we once again review the file for completeness, and then it is either moved up to the executive director for administrative approval or scheduled for a future public hearing in front of our full council. Almost all applications require a public hearing before our full council. This is a public hearing with everyone testifying under oath. And at the hearing, the council will hear all the testimony, hear from the applicant, hear from staff, hear from any potential objectors, and will attempt to perhaps balance the issues. But really, three things can happen. It can get approved as proposed. It can be approved with a modification or additional stipulation, perhaps above and beyond what we normally would put on aquaculture, or it could be denied. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what our permit process is, and I'm happy to take any comments on that. But I'm sure a lot of you have seen this before. So.
Ben, I have a question about if this process, or Jeff too, if this process is responding to all your required state and federal regulations, why are we doing the base SAMP?
Well, the base SAMP is well, I don't know, Jeff, were you gonna?
Go ahead.
Okay. The base SAMP is something that CRMC is doing, above and beyond our established regulatory program. CRMC has in the past revised its aquaculture regulations. I think kind of on average, maybe once every 10 years, something like that. And this is simply, I think, the agency looking to always better improve the process we have in place. And an essential part of the base SAMP process is the working group, is the outreach, the public outreach, and soliciting comments and feedback to help better inform potential regulatory changes in the future to improve the program.
Yeah, Ben said it almost exactly right, in that when we saw aquaculture being proposed in Narragansett Bay, we got a lot of feedback, especially from the towns in North Kingstown and Jamestown. And now that we're seeing it be located elsewhere, the feedback we're getting not only looks to be indicative that we might want to change some of our regulations and our regulatory processes. We also want to look at the notification side of it too. So we are getting a lot of good feedback from this exercise as a result of us reaching out to the communities.
Great. There are a couple of questions in the chat from Hopeful. Hopeful, could you tell us your full name just for our recording purposes? And then if you could write it in the chat, that would be wonderful. The question from Hopeful is are there any regulations about the sale of a lease? Does the lease number at CRMC stay the same, or is it a brand new number?
Yes, lease transfers are addressed in our regulations. They can be approved by the executive director, so long as the operation remains the same as it was originally approved. The lease number does stay the same, and the lease actually also stays the same. So if you have let's say a 10-year lease, and you transferred in the 5th year, that person receiving the lease only has 5 years left on the lease, so it doesn't start again. You basically step into the shoes of the previous permit holder in all respects.
Great. And who has the final say on the Shellfish survey as written by state statute, CRMC or DEM? And I know we have some DEM people on the Zoom call as well. Go
I'm
ahead,
happy
Ben.
to answer that. I'm also just curious who Hopeful is. Can they identify themselves?
Sorry, I'm having some trouble with my microphone.
Thanks.
Phil Capaldi.
Yes.
Thank you, Phil.
Shellfish survey is not mentioned anywhere in a state statute. The Shellfish survey was something that was developed as a matter of practice between CRMC and the Shellfish Advisory Panel. At times, the Shellfish survey is done by DEM. Other times, it is done by CRMC.
So I guess I thought there was a memorandum of understanding between CRMC and DEM about the shellfish sample.
There is a policy document that exists with the Marine Fisheries Council. Shellfish survey is currently done through agreement. I don't think this is written anywhere, but Anna could correct me if I'm wrong. But this is done by CRMC staff and presented to the Shellfish Advisory Panel and/or the Marine Fisheries Council for consideration and really for their benefit in the review and rendering of their opinion or recommendation to CRMC.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry I can't get my name to appear. I'm on an iPhone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Maybe we can talk a little bit about why we decided to have this meeting in particular targeted on the fishing communities. Jeff, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, it's clear that fishing occurs in Narragansett Bay in a number of different ways. And you can easily talk about commercial fishing. You can easily talk about recreational fishing. So it's important for a regulatory agency to know what uses are occurring in areas where activities are being sought. So for aquaculture, we have learned about the fishing aspects that are already going on, that have been going on in certain areas that we know about, but there are also areas of fishing that we don't know about. And those are the harder ones to discern. The recreational fishing activities would be, in my opinion, one of those activities that are harder to discern and understand where exactly they occur. So by reaching out to certain specific groups, we feel we can learn a little bit more about some discrete areas and what happens in those areas. We are working with the municipalities to help us answer those questions at the same time, because the municipalities, in our opinion, would know better what's occurring along the shorelines on a day-to-day basis, Well, we think we know, I think the towns know better. So we reach out to the towns, but we also need to reach out to the individual groups. And that's why we targeted the fishing community, both the continuum from commercial down to recreational. What is happening in Narragansett Bay out from that fishing perspective that we should know about when it comes to aquaculture planning?
Thanks, Jeff. We could also, there's a question for Bob Rowe, but before we go there, do you guys want to share the map we were talking about today at our meeting? Chris Damon is ready and willing to share that map. Would that be helpful? The one about all the fishing, remember we were talking about that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Chris, would you mind sharing? And this is Chris Damon. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about what you're sharing?
Sure. Is everybody seeing a map on the screen at the moment?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So my name is Chris Damon. I am a research associate at the Environmental Data Center on main campus of URI. And I am a map and data person. And when you start talking about, allocation of space, it's a spatial problem, right? And what often comes up when we start talking about fisheries is people would like to know what's happening where. And this is the reality. These are the best data that we have for fisheries in the Bay. And the majority of these data were collected several years ago in surveys by CRC, going out, meeting with different organizations and their members. And people would draw on nautical charts and say, we perform our activities in this location, right? And they define large areas on the nautical chart that are then transcribed back into a digital format. And I can tell you from looking at all of these different layers that we have for the recreational fishing and such, none of the people are going to be guilty or can be accused of spot burning, right? So the cardinal sin in the fishing is burning somebody's spot. And so what we have is the reality that the Bay is fully utilized in some capacity by fishing in some manner throughout the year. And the question becomes to all of you, how do we make sense of this? How do we make sense of this? How can we narrow down the areas and really begin to focus general fishing activities to areas that are truly important, that need, I don't want to say a level of protection, but a closer look, right? And so this particular map, I will actually put this, in the chat, the link, and you can go and look at it yourself. But bottom line is, these are the best data that we have available within our lab on where these different types of fishing activities are occurring within the Bay.
Does this surprise any of you fishermen or women?
All right, let me stop sharing. And I will put that in the chat just so people can look at it on their own as well.
Thank you, Chris. Does that make sense to many of you? Again, it's hard to look at it closely with the Zoom, but maybe take a look at that and see if there's some comments. Thank you, Chris. Rich, are you gonna?
Jan, am I muted?
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that it's somewhat of a general depiction rather than looking at specific areas. So I mean, I think that you could get more usable information by looking at a smaller area rather than a general depiction like that.
And go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Chris. I was just curious, how many commercial fishermen do we actually have on this call?
Do you want them to raise their hand?
Yeah, I mean, I know we got Mike McGivney.
Dave Gigliotti, Rich Hittinger, Kenny
Oh.
Mendez. We have
Gary
DEM.
Mataronis.
Gary, okay, yeah. I'm particularly interested in this map, you know, some of the commercial fishing activities, particularly like, you know, lobster, you know, certainly the cohog fishery. Is there anything that jumps out to you guys about it?
It's Gary. I'm only going to speak on the Secana River because that's where I grew up, on the Secana River, and fished there. I don't see any thing dealing with any conch traps. The Secana River has historically been, the last 12 or 15 years, a big conch habitat. And some of the guys fish singles, some of the guys fish trawls. My son and I used to fish conch, and we don't do it anymore. We probably wrapped it up about 5 or 6 years ago. But we would always work around the aquaculture, oyster aquaculture, and there was one down in Fogland. We worked around that. There was one up a little bit farther up the bay there. We worked around that because they were in such shallow water, and nobody wanted to have an interaction with them. And I think most of the guys that do it now do fish conch singles. So you might want to, I know if you get over to Bristol and Barrington area, they do fish trawls over there. Again, I don't know what kind of aquaculture there is over there, but it costs a little comping. There is no aquaculture, so there's no problem there with it for us. But just be aware, there is quite a bit of concentration of conch gear. And I assume there is so in the East and West Bay.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Gary. Gary, you had a question too, is that, or a comment?
Yeah,
Is
that was
what-
it. That was it. Thanks, Jen.
All right, thank you. Dave, do you want to say Gigliotti? Yep.
Sure. Thank you. I fish for conch as well. That's what I'm doing right now, actually. And I can tell you from on a West Bay Passage side, most of us fish trawls. It is very heavily fished. You know, I don't fish the East Passage at all. I just fish primarily the West Passage. So, you know, I shellfish, of course, as well, quahog. But in the spring and in the fall, I fish for conch, and it is we fish those shallow grounds quite a bit, and there's a lot of, I would say probably 80% of the guys fish trawls. We have quite a few big boats that come in, and they fish. It's pretty heavily fished, actually. So looking at the map, I couldn't see any coding as far as the colors. I really didn't know what they meant, to be honest. I didn't see anything on the thing to say, okay, well, purple is this and
Well,
that.
are we still? I can share it with the legend. That might be helpful.
Yeah,
So now you can see the colors on the left hand side.
I can. Oh, okay. I see it
So
now.
purple is shellfishing. I'm not sure if that was meant to capture conching as well as cohogging, but it certainly refers to cohogging.
Okay. Well, from the quahogging standpoint, that looks pretty good. Down the south side of the islands is still south side of Patience and Prudence, the south side of the Gut that has lobster fishing. I think you have in there color wise.
I can turn off some of these, make it less busy. So that's just shellfishing there.
Okay. All right. That clears up a lot.
Yeah, I know it's a lot to take in. You kind of have to flip through each layer individually to get a feel for it. And then when you put it all together, you get a different picture too.
Sure.
Chris put in a link to this map too on the chat. So if you guys want to play with it a little bit, and you can't see it very well in the Zoom. That's another way of looking at it.
And what year, Chris, was this data from?
So this is 2014, 2016, Jen. So
Yeah.
Ocean SAMP V2.
Yeah.
And is this, I mean, and is this still where lobstering is occurring in the bay? I mean, my understanding was there's a lot less of that type of activity, and it has been replaced more by the conking.
Well, I will say that I've actually fished this area today, the south side from the western side of Patience down through the south side of the Gut, and I very rarely ever seen any lobster gear through there. Not saying it doesn't occur, but I think that's more conking area than lobster.
Yeah. So put on, that's recreational fishing. That's one layer there.
Any other commercial fishermen want to say something about this map? Again, take a look at it. While you're looking at it, Chris, Deb Hagan had a question about the map. Is it a living document? What is the best way for municipalities to provide further data? Deb, do you want to say more about that question, or?
No, just noticing that Nanaquacket Pond is only colored for shell fishing and not for recreational fishing. It supports both.
So at this point, the map itself, the way it's put up, is not really a living document. It's static, but I think we need to talk within our group on how we want to bring in additional fisheries data to modify these layers. This is a snapshot in time, and how we're going to move forward is going to take a little bit additional discussion amongst ourselves. But if folks have additional information or modifications, please let us know, and we'll figure out how to work that in.
Thank you. Just turning the conversation a different way. I know that Skid, there was a question for you. Kenny, do you want to ask that question?
Sure. Thank you, Jennifer. Skid, I dropped it in the chat, but it kind of gets to what Chris was referring to and what Deb was asking about, because I think this is the biggest question, it seems, Chris. How are you going to accept input to revise that map, because there are clearly areas that people recreationally fish? And so my question for Skid is in the chat here. If you're a recreational angler, how practical is it to fish through a lease?
Yeah, so make sure I'm unmuted here. Yeah, so it's going to vary by the type of gear that's in use. So I had 500 bottom cages on 2.3 acres. I knew exactly where to go, and I would strongly recommend that anyone who's interested. So we are mandated in the statute to try and allow multiple use as much as possible. And as long as you're not helping me harvest my oysters, I'm okay with it. So you just need to know where you can go safely. And obviously, if there's floating gear, that's going to be a huge impediment. But if there's bottom gear, or, I had 15 acres of bottom plant, absolutely no problem fishing anywhere on there. And it was actually pretty good fishing. The flounder were attracted quite often times of the year. Like I say, we would go fishing. We would go to work with our fishing poles because the fishing was quite good. My partner would put scup traps around the outside of the lease. We encourage people to put any kind of gear around the edge of our stuff. And most growers are going to be quite accommodating as long as you talk to them, figure out, you don't want to be tangling up in their gear, obviously. So you need to figure out what's going to work. Talk to them. I had a guy who avoided my lease for 20 years. And I finally talked to him, and he was like, I've been afraid to go in there for 20 years. I'm like, I'm out there almost every day. You could have come up, I would have, some people water ski through there all the time. I know exactly where you can go. I know exactly what kind of gear you should use, what you should avoid. You should, you can learn a lot by talking to the grower and find out what you can do. And I strongly encourage that.
My question for you then is, if I'm throwing a 1.5 ounce or a 2 ounce lead head jig on a spinning rod blindly through a bottom marked lease area, I'm new to the area. I have no idea. I hear it's a great fishing spot. I throw it out there. I think I'd get tangled, but I don't know. You're the expert. And I heard you say in the beginning that you probably don't want to fish around the videos you just showed us because you might get tangled in there. So I just want to clarify that.
So, we would go out with rather stiff tackle, high test line and crank the bail down, because if you let your fish run, it's likely he's going to wrap a buoy. I got, 80 buoys out there, but I could tell you, that our lines run north-south. So if you wanted to drag through there, bottom with a bottom rig and you went north-south, you might be okay. But, we would lose quite a bit of gear on our own cages and lines, honestly. But if you go around the edges, the big fish are lurking there, hoping to get the small fish. And so talk to the grower. We work there. We're there pretty often. Find out what he says, and he'll tell you where you can go safely and where you're likely to lose a lure. So, surface gear on my lease, no problem. And like I say, my bottom lease, where I just had oysters free planted on the bottom, 15 acres of open fishing ground for you to go in, no sweat.
And Rob, do you know what percentage of the time recreational anglers fish subsurface versus on the surface?
I don't have any data on the recreational fisheries other than my own data, what I do. And, it depended on what fish I was going for. We would, fill the boat with winter flounder back in the day. But and the slammer scup were really quite abundant on our lease. And after we've been working for a while, it was like a chum line. We would see large keeper stripers following our boat around. You could practically hook them with a gaff. So, but each of those was a different rig. So,
and I'm wondering whether anyone on the CRMC panel here knows what percentage of the time, because we have recreational anglers on the line here, what percentage of the time recreational anglers fish on the surface versus subsurface?
Does anybody have that data?
Yeah.
Well, on the map we just showed, there are 2 layers, one for recreational fishing, one for bottom fishing.
No, but okay, fine. I'd welcome any other recreational anglers to talk about how much they're fishing subsurface here if it helps the conversation, but I don't want to distract it. Please continue.
I would just point out that we had the CCA come and testify in favor of shellfish aquaculture down in South Carolina because they recognized that it improved the habitat for summer flounder. So they were very excited to see more shellfish aquaculture come in. We were very excited to have them as allies.
Bob, we'll again, we do this meeting's recorded. We do summary notes, and we'll also make available, if it's okay with you, your PowerPoint and also those publications that you mentioned in your presentation. And if there's anything else you think we should include and share with this fishing community, be happy to do that. There is a question directed, I believe, to either Ben or Jeff. Is anyone on the call has recommendations for how CRMC can better reach fishermen about aquaculture applications and news? I'm assuming all of you are on the aquaculture listserv. We did put the link in the chat. That's a great way to find out. Any other ways, Jeff or Ben? Or anyone on the call?
Well, I would certainly recommend all anglers that are interested in fisheries management in the state, but also aquaculture as it might move through its review process and be reviewed with respect to fisheries. And to sign up for the DEM, listserv. The DEM listserv will notice what's on the agenda for the Shellfish Advisory Panel or the Marine Fisheries Council, and that's where you would see notice of their review of the aquaculture application for consistency with the marine fisheries of the state.
Again, there's an attempt here to reach out to all entities who are using the bay, and both wildlife as well as people. So the intent is to appropriately reach out to you all and communicate the process. So we need your help, however, in making sure we are responding appropriately. And so eager to find out, your listservs, or maybe you'd like someone on in your group to at least sign up for the listserv so that you can then communicate it to your fishing buddies. I know Kenny has another question, but wants to be respectful. Is there anyone else that has a question? DEM, it's great to see you, or at least your names. I haven't seen any of your faces. Be good to see you if you have any questions. So Kenny, we'll go back to you quickly, and then I also see that Deb Hagan has another question. So go ahead, Kenny.
Sure. I think having all the experts around the table, Chris, and you guys brought up the map. What will be the process for updating the recreational fishing layer on there? How are we going to do that? And who's going to make that decision? How will that process work? Because I think that's really critical.
Chris, before you jump in, I can answer a little bit of that. And Chris mentioned that has to be an ongoing discussion because I think, Ken, you're right. We have, and Deb too, we have this evolving discussion right now where we're learning more about the recreational aspects of fishing in Narragansett Bay. Very hard to pinpoint where it occurs, when it occurs, how temporal it is. Does it change over time? But we need to figure that, or at least try to figure that out so that we can add that information to a map that can be updated with some sort of data as best we can determine that data empirically so that we have good information to make decisions upon.
So is the we, as you're describing that, Jeff, the CRMC, or are you going to have some balanced group of stakeholders who help update that map?
Yeah, no, it has to be the latter, Ken. It has to be. When we make decisions, we have to. I know you all think we think we know everything, but we don't. So we need to reach out to those who do, and this is one vehicle to do that. I can't see making a fishery issue when we're not fishery experts. So we have to go out to the group and help us figure that out. If it becomes part of the SAMP plan and this map, if you will, if this aquaculture regulation relies on information that needs to be updated, then the vehicle will be a CRMC regulation or guidance or some sort of management program. But how the information within it gets changed has to be brought in from a group perspective, in my opinion. Well, not in my opinion, and I get to make that decision. So there it is.
But Jeff, wouldn't you say it's definitely a balancing act, right?
It's always a balancing. It's always a balancing act. And I think I mentioned at the very beginning that this particular part of the equation, recreational fishing, is going to be a very hard one to quantitatively and qualitatively get a handle on. But the more we talk about it and understand where and what goes on with it in the bay, the better off we'll be for, quite frankly, any activity that comes along, not just aquaculture, that we have to regulate.
And I would also add that, we have, as part of this process, reached out to groups like the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers Association and strengthened and kind of reaffirmed, how we will work with groups like that. If other interested groups want to, be on CRMC's radar for these things, and these are some of the organizations that one we include in notifications through our listserv, but we rely on some of these broader based non-governmental organizations to bring a wider kind of opinion, particularly when it comes to things like recreational fishing. So even without a map or something like that, I believe we're setting ourselves up for better communication, more consistent communication with the fishing community, particularly through those groups.
Yeah, and we have done that formally with the Saltwater Anglers Group, particularly to have basically quarterly meetings to talk about any number of issues. But that's the group that understands Rhode Island's recreational fishing aspect the best, in our opinion. So let's have a formal relationship so we can better learn from them.
And I will also volunteer, Ben and Jeff. I know that they have attended harbor commissions and other municipal meetings. So if there is I know we're in COVID world, but if there's an event that you would like them to come and talk about the Bay SAMP and the aquaculture element, then I know that they will do anything for a chicken dinner. So just call them up.
Fish dinner, Jen. Fish.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't get a chicken dinner last time. No.
If I just could close, just Jeff, just for the SAMP process and to hear your response, I completely appreciate that. I'm on the RISA legislative committee. I was on that call. There are a number of us from RISA on here, but I'm also involved with some other stakeholders and groups who are involved in this. And per the question I asked initially, like, how are you going to make the decision about how to update the recreational layer? If there's no process or no transparency around that, then it feels very much like the SAMP is sugarcoating and doing a PR, roadshow to basically take in the information and then go and make the decision yourselves. So it would be really helpful for the public and others to know how something as critical as that might happen, and that you actually do want to have balanced input in it, so we could all equally share the resource.
That's a fair comment, Ken. And like Chris mentioned early on when we was talking about the map, it's a process that we, quite frankly, haven't determined what it actually is. But from this past discussion of the past 15, 20 minutes, it's clear to reach out to folks and how to figure out how to best get information into that mapping process, if you will, on this particular issue. So we would reach out, not just through these groups. So we'd have to do a separate reach out and talk about how best to update information on that map. So the history of that map came from our work in the oceans, a special area management plan, when we're looking at renewable energy in the offshore environment. We're trying to figure out what are some of the resource issues that are out there, and we were able to put them on a map. Now that we're talking specifics, and more specifically Narragansett Bay, we can refine that, and we can have another process where we reach out to not only one particular group or this scoping effort, but to get all that information and how better to present it is what we need to do. So yeah, we would reach out to not only the saltwater anglers, but others as well.
And just to reiterate, all the data that are on that map, that is all stakeholder input. So that all came from in-person meetings with the different stakeholder groups, RISA being a large contributor to that recreational fishing layer. And again, how we have done it in the past is actually sitting down with members and having them draw areas of interest on an actual nautical chart, and then we transcribe it. That getting it into a digital format after that is a little bit tedious. So there are other ways that we can capture that information now digitally right off the bat. But again, that map, that is the best stakeholder input that was given to us, a snapshot in time, a handful of years ago. And, if it needs to be updated, then we can move in that direction.
Thank you.
Dave, I see your hand up. I just wanted to point out, so Deb Hagan mentioned the value of posting and posting more broadly the process, and we agree with you on that. And we'll be talking about that at the working group meeting on November 8th. So Dave, do you have something to?
I do,
Okay.
actually. I was actually going to mention Saltwater Angler Association, but moreover than that, would there be a vehicle that could be utilized through social media? You know, a lot of folks that do a lot of recreational fishing post pictures and things like that. So it is a big thing online. And if there was some way that you know, you could put something together to, you know, some sort of a polling type of a thing where you can reach out because there's a lot of people that don't belong to the Saltwater Anglers Association. I know within my group, we would be happy to pass along any type of information, you know, at our meetings and, you know, collect as much data as far as that, because a lot of guys that are in our group, they fish recreationally. They, you know, not all of them are total commercial fishermen. But I was just a thought that maybe you could reach a lot more folks through social media or that type of a vehicle.
Thank you, Dave. Rich, go for it.
Jen, yeah,
Yes.
I'm on my cell phone, so I don't know how to raise my hand.
I saw you raise your hand. Go
What
ahead.
I was going to say is I think that information should be updated, and we certainly could help in doing that. Now, I think from what I was told internally at RISA, that basically came from a meeting with two people at RISA, and those two people were familiar with certain areas, but they clearly said that they were not familiar with all of the different areas around the bay. So what we would do if we were trying to update that is get input from anglers who fish various portions of the bay. You know, so it would be much more than two people.
Actually, Rich, we actually came to your meeting, your public meeting, and had a chicken dinner. So we did reach out very publicly to collect that information. Go ahead, Ben.
Rich is referring to another data layer that appears
Okay.
on the DEM marine fisheries map. That was something we had a conversation about earlier. The data layer than the bay use fisheries that Chris has presented is a different layer and includes many more areas that are not included on the marine fisheries map layer.
Okay, good. Thank you, Ben, for clarifying that. I couldn't tell if it was the same data layer or not.
I thought they might have been identical too, but they are not.
Thank you.
Anna, I see you here. Thank you for being here. Is there anything you'd like to add? I know we have been reaching out to DEM to ensure that we are using the most up-to-date data that you all have as well. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Yes, Jen. Thanks for taking notice. So I would like to say that we are going to be updating some of our, well, one layer in particular on our marine fisheries map that will become publicly available. I can't say when it'll happen, but we will be updating and adding in our dredge survey data for the quahog assessment. So that information will be more publicly accessible for people. And so that can probably be something that could be added into the Bay SAMP map.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's all I have at this moment for additional information that will be added to our maps.
Thank you. And Gary Mataronis, I'm assuming you see Ben's comment about, anyone is welcome to join the listserv. So if you'd like to give Ben an email, we can make sure that the Rhode Island Lobstermen's Association is on there if they're not already.
Yeah, I just went to the website. I don't see a contact email for the association, but I will gladly add whatever email provided.
Okay, I can send that to you, Ben. It's actually, I believe my nephew is still the president of the RILA, so I'll send that over to you. I think it'd be important to have that group make comments on this. Thank
Yeah,
you.
if you want to send me the whole board members' email addresses, I can add them all as a group. It's no problem.
All right, very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, is it Phil, Hopeful? I love that name. I think you should change your name to Hopeful. Is that the name of your, is that the name of your boat?
Yes, it is. So recreational fin fisher, recreational shell fisherman, just looking at and knowing, growing up in lifetime Rhode Island, growing up in Warwick, knowing that, you know, you would eagerly await DEM's opening of certain areas for recreational shell fishing that may have been closed for a number of years or period of time. Has the aquaculture group given any thought of having certain leases in the bay be contingent or conditional, in a sense of, yes, it's a 15-year lease, but in say year 4, it's going to move 250 feet to the south? I'm just thinking, you know, the terror as a recreational user is this area, whether or not I can prove that it's used recreationally, is gone forever. Leases are gone through the due process, money spent on the leasee's part, and then eventually turned over to a new person or sold. So essentially, those locations are lost for public use, essentially for maybe a lifetime if you're old like me. So I'm just hopeful that CRMC might say, yes, we're giving, you know, this lease, but you'll still have the lease, but we have identified that it's going to need to be rotate, you know, kind of like rotate the crops. Mr. Rowe basically said, you know, the oysters do also poop. So, you know, there is some fouling there besides the good and the good stuff that the oysters bring. So that's my question. Have they thought of that, of moving leases within the 15-year span?
I would say leases have moved. They go through the same application process as a new lease would. And leases are not something that exists in perpetuity. We've taken leases away. We've revoked leases for underperformance. We've revoked leases for not abiding by the terms of the lease, the contract that they have with the state.
But is that lease area then now no longer used as a spot for aquaculture, or is it just, hey, that's already been through the process, we know we have a viability area that's hit all the marks?
No, it would go back to the beginning, to the very same review process as any lease would, if it was a lease that, say, we took away, you know, for not being used, because you have to use your lease. You can't just sit on it for prospective reasons.
Is there a list of those that have been revoked within the CRMC database?
We can generate
Is that
it.
public knowledge?
Yeah, we can generate
Well, I
it.
mean, it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, that should be in the database.
It is. Yeah, we can generate it.
I would love to see that. That would be great. Is there a timeline of when that could be generated?
Give us a little bit, but we'll pull that together for you.
I would say,
thank you.
So if a lease is abandoned or is not renewed, even potential, then anyone who wanted to apply for a lease in that same spot would have to go back to the very beginning. And if conditions have changed, that would be considered as part of the review process. That was the feedback we were getting.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep, no problem.
Bob, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so back in 1990, I proposed initially a 60-acre spot where I would have my cages and rotate them every 6 months to a different spot to accommodate wild harvest quahog fishery, and was roundly and soundly chewed out for having such a ludicrous concept presented. It became so contentious that I quickly pulled that application and went to a fixed 2.3 acre lease. But I would also point out that you only get that lease when you've shown that there's no pre-existing fishery, and it's because the standing stock of clams is less than 3 per square meter, which is barely worth your time. So it's kind of unlikely that they would recruit. I mean, in my own case, it did recruit because we had mass mortality of oysters, and we hardened the bottom with about a ton of oyster shell, and that made a perfect habitat for a recruitment of clams. But I would say that's rather rare. But yeah, I would just point out that the idea I thought had a lot of merit, but I was not joined in that.
Great, thanks, Bob. Okay. Any other questions? Jeff?
Me, Jeff, or Jeff Gardner?
Oh, well, Jeff Gardner, did you want to elaborate on your point? You were saying we are required by the state to post a bond of for any cleanup that may occur. Do you want to elaborate on that point?
I can speak to it if Jeff doesn't want to. He sometimes has audio problems, I know. But essentially, yes. Yeah, you are required to have a bond. It's a minimum bond of $5,000. The largest bond we have in the state is for $40,000. And that bond is there to ensure the cleanup of any deer if the lease were to be, say, abandoned, or if we were to, say, revoke a lease for cause, and the applicant did not, or the farmer did not clean up the lease before the stated time, we would invoke that performance bond to, basically contract out the work to clean up the site, remove any deer, basically to return it to pre-operation state.
Thanks, Ben. Jeff Willis, did you want to say something? Okay.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, Kenny, you have your hand raised again?
Yeah, sorry.
Good.
One other thing, just to talk about the notification process. Ben, thank you for reminding all of us what the process is. But for recreational anglers, when it goes to the RAMFC, to decide on whether or not there's recreational angler use, there's a separate notification process outside of the CRMC's notification process for a specific aquaculture lease.
That is correct? Because it's DEM's board body.
So it's possible that someone who is new to this and just tracking it might not realize they need to track it through the RAMFC versus the CRMC.
Anything's possible. My advice to anyone interested in fishing, recreational fishing in general, would be to follow the happenings of the Rhode Island Marine Fisheries Council, because they decide many matters, even beyond aquaculture, that could affect the recreational angler.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Bob maybe on the notification process and how that dynamic works with respect to the tension between, recreational fishing and not, and some of this stuff.
Thanks, Kenny. I think that's me. This Bob, and it's good to see everyone. Happy to report that yes, we routinely for all meetings of the Rhode Island Marine Fisheries Council and the Council's Shellfish Advisory Panel put out a public notice via our Marine Fisheries listserv. So I would sort of echo Ben's comment that for anyone with an interest in any recreational fishing issue, including those pertaining to aquaculture lease proposals, to be on that listserv, be made aware of meetings, and of course the agendas for those meetings, and thereby be able to participate in the process. Anna, I believe we also notice on the Secretary of State's website for the Fishery Council meetings, is that true as well for the Shellfish Advisory Panel meetings?
Yes, that's correct. And it goes on the calendar there too.
So that's our process, and I would leave it up to the group to decide whether there's a disconnect there or enough symmetry, so to speak, or alignment to with regard to the CRMC's process. I think it's a good question, Kenny, and we're happy to do what we can to help ensure consistent and clear notification regarding all matters. Thanks.
No, thanks, Bob. I would just encourage Jeff and Ben as you think through this, and you in the spirit of continuous improvement, if you are the point people for an aquaculture operation, then anyone who wants to provide stakeholder notice knows how to give notice in the proper areas. And perhaps you could make the effort to say, sign up to the RIMFC if you can't engineer that through software, but say if an application is coming up, here are the various things you need to track. So those who want to give you true stakeholder input can do that. In the same way you help applicants through the process, you could be helping stakeholders who want to comment.
If I got a call from a stakeholder regarding that, I certainly would walk them through it.
Yeah, and I think we can add that to our packet of information as soon as tomorrow morning and start getting that incorporated into the information that we pass out too.
Great, thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Okay. There's been some really good comments, recommendations, and again, please know this is in the spirit of improving the existing process, which again abides by all state and federal regulations. The intent is to do a better job for Rhode Islanders. On another note, so we are, as many of you know, are have an educational session taking place too. We had Mike Rice present about the history of aquaculture, and tomorrow afternoon we have Dennis Nixon, who's going to be talking about the concept of a riparian privilege from a historical and current perspective. As it relates to aquaculture, we have over 100 people signed up. So it will be very interesting. This will also be recorded. So if you can't make the meeting, you can definitely catch it on the website. We are asking you, you really need to register in order to get to the link. So please register if you are interested in joining that event. I will continue. I'm still looking to see if there's any last minute questions, but we do have, the purpose of this meeting was again to talk about the fishing issues, fishing comments from the fishing community. I think we did a great job talking about that. We will have a full working group meeting on November 8th. And what that means is you'll see on the website, we have a list of members who are we consider on the working group, and however, and they will receive an invitation to this meeting. However, this is, as all meetings are, open to everyone and be communicated via the aquaculture listserv as well. So soon, again, we'll send out this recording. And we have Sue Kennedy here writing summary notes, so you can share these with your friends. Azure, did you want to say something?
Just a quick additional information about our webinar series. Jen put the information for Dennis Nixon's presentation tomorrow night, but we will have one in November titled 3 Scientists Walk into an Oyster Bar. So it's going to be 3 different scientists, researchers talking about their aquaculture related work they're doing. So that'll be November. All this information you can get through the CRMC listserv, the SAMP website, etc. We'll be posting details on that November presentation, November 23rd, I think it's going to be. And then in December, we're going to have a conversation with Rhode Island DEM and the town of Warren and Roger Williams University, and they're going to speak about shellfish restoration and enhancement work that's happening in the state. So from here through December, we have some webinars you guys can tune into. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Azure. That was great. Okay, so I'm going to pass this off to Jeff, who always likes to end these sessions with a smile and a joke.
I don't have a joke. I think I'm funny, but in my own mind. Thank you all for making the time. It's clear that you have a lot of interest in the matter. And as Jennifer just said, it's in the interest of making the process better. I think I've mentioned in previous scoping meetings like this that, and Bob Rowe is really applicant zero. He understands that when we started this issue with aquaculture in the salt ponds, we thought we figured out how to do it better, the regulatory process, the notification process. And then the other salt ponds started seeing more aquaculture, and we started this process again there. Now we're seeing it in Narragansett Bay, and we're having the same conversation because each time issues come up that we hadn't anticipated the time before. So we very much appreciate you all taking the time to continue the conversation, to continue drilling down and making it a better process so that everybody has a voice in the matter. And in the end, we can make a better decision. Again, thanks for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.